Okay, just wanted to say before I start this video, one, I'm sorry if it sounds like I have a cold, it's because I do right now, and secondly, I apologize if the footage looks wonky at a lot of points. There's a lot of scan lines that tend to appear in some of them, and I don't really know why they showed up. OBS tends to be a bit weird, but yeah. But anyways, on with the rest of the video, and again, I'm sorry if my voice is a little hard to listen to at points. Yeah, so I'm fully aware that this is kind of different from the content a lot of you have come to know me for. Pretty much all of my videos for the past year or so have been centered around From Software games. Don't get me wrong, those are some of my absolute favorite games of all time. But I felt like spicing things up for once, and I decided to make a video about another game I happen to really love. It may surprise a lot of you to know that not only am I an absolutely massive fan of From Software games such as Elden Ring or Dark Souls, but I am also a massive fan of Nintendo. And don't worry, I'm not like one of the fanboys, trust me. Please, do not think that I'm toxic for this, please, please! I pretty much grew up with Nintendo games, and they helped shape my love for video games today. And one series that I particularly hold dear to my heart is the Luigi's Mansion trilogy, and in particular, Luigi's Mansion 2 Dark Moon. Even though I know that the third game technically has better gameplay in a lot of areas in this game, Dark Moon has always remained my absolute favorite among the trilogy. However, Dark Moon also tends to not be as loved as the other two games in the Luigi's Mansion series because of one little thing: the mission system. You see, unlike the original and number 3, Luigi's Mansion Dark Moon is split up into a bunch of different missions across the game's 5 mansions. Me personally though, I don't really mind this mission system and I think it was implemented pretty well. However, there are a fair amount of missions in the game, being about 29 missions in total excluding bonus missions. And with that many, some are bound to be worse than others, but instead of just ranking them worst to best, I thought it would be more fun to go through each mission chronologically and give a review of each one. After I finish giving my commentary about each mission, I'll put it in a tier that I think it deserves, whether it be S, A, B, C, D, or F tier. Also, side note, I will not be counting gems towards each mission's quality. I don't really think they play that big of a role in the game that makes them super noteworthy, but if there's a way to reach one that I think is particularly interesting, I'll definitely mention it. One last thing I want to note is that in case you weren't able to tell, all of the footage shown here is taken from the Nintendo Switch port of the game. I would have recorded the footage from the original 3DS version of the game, but I'm not fetching out my old 3DS to do that, and plus, on the Switch, the resolution is much higher. But with that said, let's start out with the first mansion in the game, which is also our first set of missions for the video. The Gloomy Manor is the first mansion of the game that you'll get to explore, and it has a roughly similar vibe to the one from Luigi's Mansion 1. Of course, being that it is the first mansion, its primary goal is to set you up for the rest of the game, and plus, it's of course the most basic out of all the mansions. However, simplicity is not always a bad thing, and this one is definitely a classic in my eyes, even if most of the mansions after it are better. This is also the place where Professor Egad was studying the ghosts before they became hostile after the Dark Moon was shattered. Which makes it make sense that it's the first one he would send us to. Now with all of that said, let's get into the first mission of this mansion and also the first mission of the game. Starting off the game is Mission A-1, the Poltergust 5000. Our first objective of the mission is to go into the Gloomy Manor and search the garage to retrieve the titular Poltergust 5000. This is pretty much the upgraded version of the Poltergust 3000 from the original Luigi's Mansion, and for some reason, Egad left it in his car? Like, seriously, of all the places to put it, why would you put it in your car? That does not make any sense. After a bit of Egad's yapping, we finally get pixelated over to the Gloomy Manor, and Luigi proceeds to act like it's the most terrifying thing he's ever witnessed, which I absolutely love.
Oh, here I go! Oh. Oh boy.
From there, we enter into the front yard of the Gloomy Manor and get our first call from Egad teaching us how to sprint. And you'd better get used to hearing the theme of the DS in this game because Egad calls you a lot. We also get a pretty silly cutscene after peering through one of the windows, introducing us to this game's ghosts. After chasing down a mouse for a little bit to try and get the front door key, we can get inside the Gloomy Manor, and right to our left once we enter is the garage. This game may not have a huge amount of seriously unsettling moments, but the ambience that plays when we first enter the Gloomy Manor is genuinely pretty creepy. That atmosphere gets changed up entirely though as soon as we actually collect the Poltergust 5000. After we collect it, a bunch of rubbish falls in front of the door leading out of the garage. We of course have to use the Poltergust to suck up all of the rubbish, which also teaches the player how to use it. The ambience also switches from the creepy, unwelcoming ambience to the really catchy theme that plays for the Gloomy Manor. One really neat little thing I like as well is that if you return to this mission after you get the Darklight device and go into the garage and then use the Darklight device in there, you can unlock this mission's boo. This isn't the first boo that you can find in the game, but I think it's pretty well hidden and it's pretty easy to miss it if you return to the mission. After you leave the garage, the new objective becomes to chase after the ghosts who stole the stroll bulb. But when you go to the end of the hallway they've retreated into, you'll find that the door they went inside is currently locked. Now you have to go back to the mud room, which is at the right of the mansion's entrance, and then find the key in there. And also, if you look out the window, you'll see the first appearance of the Polterpup in the trilogy, which, come on, I mean, I just absolutely love this little guy. Look at him, he's so cute. The door outside the mudroom is only accessible after you get the strobe bulb though, so if you go back here, you'll get the first gem of the game. Once you get in the foyer, you'll see where the strobe bulb was hidden, up in the chandelier. In order to get it down, you'll have to solve a fairly simple fan puzzle to be able to bring the chandelier down and grab the strobe bulb. In this game, the strobe bulb basically serves as both your method of stunning ghosts so that they can be sucked up, as well as something that can activate a bunch of devices. Once you get the strobe bulb, you have to use it to gain access to the mansion's bathroom. You then proceed to do something pretty dang perverted and creepy by removing the shower curtain while one of the ghosts is taking a shower. I feel bad for the little guy, I mean, come on. Then you have to catch that ghost that you completely violated just there, and then another ghost. After you finish catching them, you have to go back out into the foyer and catch all of the remaining greenies. If you don't know, greenies are the most basic type of ghost in this game, and all of the ghosts in this mission are greenies. Once you've finished up catching all the greenies, the mission's over. Overall, it was extremely simple being the first mission in the game, but that's completely understandable, and it does an alright job as a tutorial for the game. I will say though, it doesn't have very good replay value because, well, it's extremely easy. Again, I understand why, it's literally the tutorial for the game, but still. So it's a pretty decent tutorial, but nothing really special in itself, and so because of that, I'm gonna put it in C tier. Picking up right where the previous mission left off is A-2, Gear Up. Your objective at the start of this mission is to go back into the foyer of the mansion and then activate the mechanism inside it. At first, this seems like it's going to be really simple, but once you get there, you get introduced to a new kind of ghost, the Slammer. This seems all fine and nice until you realize that all of the slammers you see in the cutscene are stealing the gears of the mechanism. Once this happens, your objective is completely changed. Now you have to hunt after all 4 of the slammers and take the gears back. After a brief little call from EGAD, you may go over to try and open the door to the hallway next to the foyer, only to then discover that a greenie locked the door and has run away with the key. So now you have to chase after the greenie and then take the key back. From here you get a choice of whether you want to do the upstairs first or the downstairs first. Already, this shows a pretty significant step up in quality compared to the first mission. In A-1, you only had access to a very limited portion of the Gloomy Manor, but here a significantly larger portion of the mansion opens up. In this playthrough, I decided to try the downstairs hallway first. 2 of the doors in this hallway are currently inaccessible, but you'll be able to gain access to them in later missions. The 3 rooms in this hallway that you do currently have access to are the lab, the secret pocket, and the studio. Except I kind of lied about the studio, because if you enter the secret pocket and then peer through a hole, you'll see that the door to the secret studio is being blocked off from the inside. Hey, it's me, Gussie from the future. Before anybody says anything about this in the comments, I have no idea why I called it the secret studio. It's just called the studio, please. I swear, like, if I see a bunch of people making fun of me for this, I'm going to scream. Yeah, I'm a bit of an idiot, but, back to Gussie from when he was narrating this. So you can't actually access it yet. However, the lab is accessible, and you can go in there to find one of the stolen gears. There are 2 greenies in the lab, but once you manage to catch both of them, the slammer reveals himself, and then you can catch him and take his gear. The attacks from the slammers are slower than the greenies, but they also hit harder, and plus the slammers have more health, so they can be a bit tougher to try and catch. As you return to the foyer and try to go up the steps, you'll get introduced to another new ghost variety, the Hiders. The Hiders don't have as much health as the Slammers, but they do have more health than the Greenies, and plus they have the unique mechanic of hiding. Basically, they'll hide in a piece of furniture or so, and throw objects at you from it. In order to catch them, you have to find them and then stun them and suck them up. The second floor's Master Hall is very similar to the one on the ground floor. It has 2 rooms that you're able to enter, both with a gear inside them. Those 2 rooms you're able to access are the parlor and the master bedroom. Revealing the ghosts in the parlor is pretty simple, as you just have to blow on the gramophone to make it play music and the ghosts will pop out. After you capture 2 greenies, the slammer will once again reveal itself. The bedroom, though, is a little bit less straightforward than that, because at first you're seemingly at a dead end because there's nothing really in here, and the door that you would think leads to another room actually doesn't work. It may take a little bit to notice the string hanging down from the wall, but once you pull on it, a bed reveals itself. What you have to do now is sit on the bed and it'll throw you back into the study. This is where the gear actually is. This time, instead of 2 greenies, 4 greenies will show up, and you have to capture the slammer after them. It's still not super hard, but it's still a good bit of fun. After the slammer's been captured and the gear has been retrieved, you're now left with the puzzle of how exactly to get into the studio. Thankfully though, you don't have to go very far to figure it out. If you blow the carpet off to one side and then stand on the new pressure plate underneath it, it'll extinguish the fire in the fireplace. This then lets you go inside the fireplace, which then drops you right down into the studio to get the final gear. I think this was a genuinely great piece of level design right here, and it was thought out very well. This time, instead of greenies, you have 2 hiders that you have to try and capture before the slammer shows up. But once you've finished with all of them, you've collected all of the gears. Then you have to go back into the foyer and try to activate the mechanism, but once you do that, turns out the gears are all busted up and you can't use them, so EGAD brings you back to the lab. This now marks the end of the mission. In my opinion, I think A-2 is a massive improvement over A-1, and it's really good and has really good replay value. Even if it's still not super hard, it introduced new varieties of ghosts, and along with that, it had genuinely great instances of level design being very well thought out. It feels like a lot more of the mansion opened up than did before, and I just really adore this mission. The forced exploration was done really well, and overall, I think this mission deserves A tier. Right after EGAD's done fixing up the gears though, you're sent right back into the Gloomy Manor for mission A-3, Quiet Please. Now you're finally able to use the mechanism in the foyer, but you also have to investigate the library because EGAD detected a ghost in there. And as soon as you enter into the mission, something's a little off. The music that normally plays in the Gloomy Manor isn't playing, and instead the sound of distant piano music takes its place. This music is honestly pretty creepy in my opinion, and it actually had me feeling kind of uneasy. And when you go through the guard hall, all of the armor suits that were there in the previous 2 missions are nowhere to be seen. This, combined with the distant piano music and the sound of faint rain outside, is just really unsettling. It really gives the atmosphere that things aren't currently as they should be. This is also the last of the 3 missions in the game where you have to return to them after beating them to be able to access the boo. The boo for this mission is hidden in the studio, and you have to use the dark light device where the painting should be to reveal it. When you use the mechanism in the foyer, it lowers the fish tank that was on the upper level of it down below, revealing the door behind it. By revealing this one singular door, you've pretty much opened up the rest of floors 1 and 2 of the mansion. Since the library is inaccessible from downstairs, you'll have to access it via the 2nd floor of the Gloomy Manor. By going through the door now where the tank used to be, you enter into the lobby of the mansion. After defeating the 2 greenies in there, as well as the slammer that shows up with a butt-ton of spiders, you can go through the door to the north and enter into the upper level of the library. As you get closer to the library, the music gets louder and louder until you finally enter the library.
Huh?
Yeah, so as it turns out, the answer to why the music was playing was nowhere near as terrifying as the game made it out to be. The creepy music you heard in the distance coming from the library was just the ghost inside the library trying to learn how to play the piano. Whenever you enter the library, he's managed to master playing the piano, and he goes from playing something disturbing to something just flat out groovy. The complete subversion of expectations, as well as the change in atmosphere as it goes from creepy to genuinely really groovy, is just incredibly funny to me. You have to make your way across the upper level of the library while dodging the books that the ghost is throwing at you. And honestly, if it weren't for those books that the ghost was throwing at you, I would have thought that it was trying to get Luigi to dance instead of trying to get rid of him. Anyway, so once you've made it across the library and into the dining room, you'll have to open up the chute inside the dining room, crawl inside it, and then get dropped down into the kitchen below. When you've dropped down into the kitchen, another greenie will reveal itself, except this time it's actually armed with a pot, a lid, and a rolling pin. I love this game. Seriously, look at the little guy. Another regular greenie shows up as well as another armed one. With the armed greenies, they're usually invincible when it comes to flashing them, and you have to wait for a specific opening once they're stunned to be able to flash them. In order to stun them, you just have to avoid whenever they try doing a spin attack against you. Once you've managed to defeat the greenies and enter into the lower level of the library, you can finally access the ghost in the library. This ghost also happens to be a new variety of ghost as well, the poltergeist, which is a recurring type of mini-boss in this game. There are two other encounters with poltergeists that happen in the game, both of which are different flavors in this one, but the base poltergeist fight is still not bad. It makes for a pretty good first mini-boss. Poltergeists have the gimmick of being able to turn invisible and throw objects at you from a distance via telekinesis. Here you have to pay attention to the color of the fire of each candlestick, and if one of the candlesticks or more turns blue, that's where the poltergeist currently is. You then have to flash in that direction to be able to stun the poltergeist and then start sucking him in. Once you've captured the first poltergeist though, it's still not over, as you still have to capture 2 more poltergeists that descend into the room. It makes for a really fun and enjoyable experience trying to capture one of the poltergeists while simultaneously maneuvering around and jumping over the objects thrown by the other. Capturing both of the poltergeists ends the mission and you're sent back to Egad's lab. Compared to the previous mission, this one was pretty short and very linear, however, I don't think it's bad per se. There weren't really any super interesting ghost encounters outside of the mini-boss, but the whole mission is focused around the mini-boss. And that mini-boss, the trio of poltergeists, happens to be a really fun one and a very solid introduction to mini-bosses in this game. So overall, while the content outside of the mini-boss was lacking, the mini-boss itself was really good. And so because of that, I think this mission deserves to be put in B tier. Once the poltergeist has been dealt with in the library, we move on to mission A-4, Visual Tricks. At first, the mission's objective seems like it's going to be relatively simple. We just have to enter into the lab in the Gloomy Manor and retrieve the Darklight device. However, when we're about to enter the lab, the door completely disappears and we have to find another way in. There's no apparent way inside from downstairs, so we have to go upstairs to get in, but when we try to do that, we have another encounter with one of the hiders. This encounter is significantly more difficult than the one in A-2 because instead of there just being the one hider, there's a slammer that shows up as well. Along with this, 2 more hiders show up after you catch the first one. Once you've dealt with all of them, the way to reach the lab is actually pretty simple, as you just have to drop through the fireplace in the parlor. I feel like they were going for a similar thing to the fireplace drop into the studio from A-2, but here it's not really as noteworthy. Especially since there's no real puzzle solving involved with finding the entrance to the lab. You just kinda enter the room and then the entrance is revealed to you. When you try to take the Darklight device though, a greenie with a pair of sunglasses on shows up and steals it away. What you then have to do is flip the chalkboard over to make the greenie pop back out. However, since it's got sunglasses on, you won't be able to flash it normally. What you instead have to do is suck off the sunglasses and then flash it. Of course, more sunglasses wearing greenies show up after this, but just like the first one, they're pretty easy to deal with. Once you've dealt with all the greenies, you can now grab the Darklight device, which is one of the most useful tools in the entire game. Basically, the way it works is that when you use it on an invisible object and then suck up all the spirit balls, it then makes that object fully visible again. This is often used to find hidden doors, cool little secrets, some extra gold, as well as booze. Speaking of booze, the next objective for the mission is to track down the boo that released all of the spirit balls and made the door turn invisible. This is one of very few times in the game where catching a boo is actually mandatory when it comes to completing a mission and thus beating the game. The way you exit the lab is by using the dark light device where the door used to be, which then makes the door visible again and thus you're able to walk out. You then have to use the dark light device again out in the hallway to reveal a door that wasn't there before, as well as use it on a painting to get the key. You can also see the trail left behind by the boo that created all the illusions with the dark light device. However, it leads into the dining room, which is currently blocked off. You have to go through the door that you found in the hallway out into the patio first. You'll find that the door leading into the kitchen, which is right below the dining room, is completely locked, and you don't really know where the key is so far. So now you're left with the puzzle of where exactly is the key at? What you have to do in order to get the key is to go further out into the patio and use the dark light device where you see a bunch of crows, only to reveal a statue of Egad with the weird propeller device. If you blow on the blades of the propeller, it'll cause the statue to lift up, revealing the key. And also, side note, I just love that Egad put a statue of himself in this mansion after he moved into it. That is such an amazing move, I love it. When you enter into the kitchen, you'll first have to fend off a bunch of greenies and hiders that are currently in there. Once you've dealt with all of them, you then have to use the chute to get up into the dining room. Whenever you actually enter into the dining room, the boo then turns the table invisible and then flies out a window. In order to make the boo come back, you have to make the dining table visible again via the dark light device. Then the boo looks like it's about to cry, which almost makes me feel bad for the thing, and then you have to try and catch it. It's a solid introduction to how to catch boos, although I wish it would have emphasized more of the hidden aspect of the boos in the game. And of course, being that it is the first boo that you're able to actually catch in the game, it's pretty easy to actually deal with. But once you've managed to successfully catch it, the mission is over. I'm gonna have to be honest, this mission doesn't really feel like anything special, and in my opinion is easily the most forgettable mission of the Gloomy Manor. It's not really bad or anything, I think it is fairly solid, however, it doesn't really feel like it stands out when compared with all the other missions in the game, or even all the other missions in the Gloomy Manor. Although I do feel like it does a very good job of introducing the dark light device and giving the player an idea of how to use it. The ghost encounters in this mission weren't really all that bad, but again, they don't really feel like they're anything special or noteworthy. Overall, this mission feels like it's a very good guide for how to use one of the game's most important tools, but nothing really special beyond that. And because it's a good tutorial for the dark light device but not much beyond that, I can't really put it any higher than C tier. Once we've managed to capture the boo in A-4 though, we're still not done with the Gloomy Manor just yet, and now we've finally moved on to the penultimate mission for the mansion, A-5 Sticky Situation. This mission is a bit different from the other ones in the Gloomy Manor. All of the other missions in the Gloomy Manor are focused around catching ghosts of some sort, however, this mission doesn't really focus on that. Instead, in A-5, the Gloomy Manor has become infested with spider webs, and we have to go around to each room where they appear in and clear all of them out. The rooms the spiderwebs appear in is partially randomized, and some rooms only have a chance for them to appear. However, there are a few rooms where the spiderwebs will always appear no matter what. Those rooms being the common hall, the library, the master hall, the bedroom, the balcony, and the rafters. Speaking of the library, it's actually where this mission's boo is at, which is quite nice. Aside from the boo encounter though, there's only 3 other ghost encounters in the entire mission. The first is just a couple of greenies out in the lobby, the second is a greenie with a gold greenie out in the patio, and the third is just some greenies and hiders in the kitchen. You can also clear out the webs in pretty much any order that you want to as well, so I won't be going over anything chronologically because, well, there's no set order to anything in this mission. So instead, I'll just be briefly going over each of the mandatory rooms for this mission. The Common Hall is one of the more basic of the rooms in this mission, as you pretty much just grab a ball of spiderweb stuff, light it on fire, and then walk forward and burn all the webs. Yeah, it's not really that interesting. The library, though, is a little more interesting because it's split into two parts. The lower library, where you just suck up a bunch of spiderwebs like they're nothing, and the upper library, where you have to approach from a certain direction and then use the dark light device on a painting to be able to light one of the spiderweb balls on fire. After you've done that, then you can clear out the massive web blocking your way into the lobby. The balcony is kind of similar to this, although instead of using the dark light device, you're using the strobe bulb to activate a grill, and then you're dragging one of the web's threads over to the fire. After doing that, then you grab one of the spiderweb balls, light it on fire, waddle your way back over to the other massive spiderweb, and then set it on fire. The bedroom is one of the more easy ones, however it has a slight puzzle aspect to it. Pretty much there's a thread with a ball attached to it hanging from the ceiling fan, as well as a massive spiderweb in the room. What you have to do is turn on the furnace, then spin the fan so that the thread reaches the fire, and then it spins back around to hit the web. It's pretty easy to figure out, but it does have a slight little challenge to it, which I do kind of appreciate. The Master Hall has easily the most extreme infestation out of anywhere in the mansion. What you have to do to get rid of this infestation is suck up one web in front of a painting to make it fall over and tip a candlestick to its side. Then you have to drag a spiderweb thread hanging from the ceiling over to the fire to burn the web. Once the web is burned, one of the web balls will fall right down onto the floor. Once it's fallen to the floor, you have to grab it, take it over to the candlestick, then light it on fire. Then, of course, waddle your way to the end of the Master Hall and set the very large spiderweb on fire. Then, of course, lastly, there's the rafters, which is probably the most simple out of all of them, as there's not really all that many puzzle aspects involved. There's some bits where you have to use the dark light device on fire paintings and stuff, but mostly you're just sucking up the webs. However, it does introduce the mechanic of walking and balancing on beams, and all I'm going to say is thank God I was using my Nintendo Switch Pro controller, because if I tried doing this in handheld mode, Joy-Con drift would have made this absolute torture. When you manage to clear out the final spiderwebs though, EGAD brings you back to his lab as usual and ends the mission. Overall, this mission had not many ghost encounters and focused on something completely unrelated to ghosts, really. From the way I described this mission, it sounds like it would be really tedious and not all that great, but for me, something about this mission just kinda does it for me. Granted, I don't think this mission is amazing or anything, far from it, but I still think it's kinda good. I genuinely enjoyed myself here, so I think this mission deserves to be put in B tier. And so now is our last mission for the Gloomy Manor A-Boss, Confront the Source. This is the final mission of the Gloomy Manor, while also being the first boss mission of the game. As soon as the mission starts, you're dropped directly into the lobby of the mansion, and you're tasked with doing one simple thing: taking the elevator down into the cellar of the mansion. And since you're not able to leave the room at all except through the elevator, and since there's nothing else to really do here, you have to go down that elevator.
I do it. Yeah. Uh-oh. Hello?
And so here we are now in the cellar. There's not really much down here, save for a massive spider web at the end of the corridor in the cellar with a thread poking out. We might as well pull on it. What's the worst that could happen? And so the first boss fight of the game begins. This is where I'm gonna have to stop praising Dark Moon and I'm gonna have to criticize it a little bit. While I love most of the things about Dark Moon, and I do feel that it is the best of the series for me personally, the boss fights in this game are not the best part of it by a long shot. Yeah, there are a few really good boss fights, but most of the bosses in Dark Moon I feel could have been better. There's two main reasons why. Firstly is the lack of originality with a lot of them, because instead of having the unique portrait ghosts of Luigi's Mansion 1 and 3, instead, Dark Moon has the Possessor ghosts. Not only are the names of each of them very similar to each other, just being a different adjective put in front of the word Possessor, but they all basically look the same and blend together in my mind. Adding on to this, the things they tend to actually possess are not super interesting. The second reason why I think most of the bosses could have been better is because, well, the mechanics usually just aren't really all that fun with this game's bosses. In fact, most of its bosses feel a bit too easy for my taste. With all of that having been said though, I feel like the Grouchy Possessor is a really solid first boss and just a pretty good boss in general. He possesses the giant Spider Queen in the basement of the Gloomy Manor, and a lot of the time it'll use her to shoot poison at you from her rear. There's a thread poking out from the web behind the boss, and a knight with a torch. However, when you get close to the thread, that's when the boss tries to attack you. What you have to do is use the strobe bulb when the boss rears back to attack, and then drag the thread all the way back to the knight with the torch. After you've managed to burn the web, that's when the Possessor pops out of the Spider Queen. He'll ram around a little bit, but the way you deal with him is basically the same as any other ghost. Except with him, once you do a full vacuum suction, he doesn't get sucked up immediately. Instead, he manages to escape and then repossesses the Spider Queen. After that, the Spider Queen then extends the hallway even further back, knocking a wall down in the process. Now you're not able to pull the thread far back enough in order to reach the knight with the torch, and the fight becomes much more puzzle-focused. There's now a thread hanging down from the fan, and you have to blow the fan in a way to free a knight with a halberd from a spider web. After doing this, then you have to grab the thread from the main spider web you're trying to burn and drag it over to the knight with the halberd. If done correctly, the knight will then catch the thread on his halberd, and then you have to do the whole fan thing again, this time catching the thread on fire. Then, of course, once that's done, the Possessor reveals himself for a second time. The hallway once again gets extended during Phase 3, and this time the puzzle is significantly more simple than before. This time you gotta grab a spiderweb ball, waddle your way all over to the knight with the torch, then light the ball on fire. Then slowly walk all the way back toward the boss, avoiding all of the little spiders and poison goop stuff the boss shoots out. Then you've got to free another armor suit with a torch that then gets lit on fire. After you've done that, then you grab the thread from the web, drag it over to the torch, and then the Possessor is brought out a third time. This time you finally catch him for real though, and then the mission ends. For all of your troubles, you end up getting rewarded with your first Dark Moon piece of the game. For being the first boss of the game, the Grouchy Possessor surprisingly wasn't bad and could actually be a bit challenging for first-time players. Obviously, it's not really hard now, but I mean, come on, it's the first boss of the game, what would you expect? It also feels a lot more puzzle-focused than the other bosses in this game. I don't really know how else to put it. The fight isn't amazing or anything, but I think it's a solid first boss and it's still fun to go back to. So overall, I think that the first boss mission of the game, A-Boss, Confront the Source, deserves to be put in B tier. But now since I've finished my commentary of this mission, that means it's time to wrap up the Gloomy Manor. Overall, for being the first mansion of the game, it really wasn't all that bad. The Gloomy Manor, while being kind of generic at a lot of points, had some really good level design in my opinion, and none of the missions really stood out as being particularly unfun. I don't think the Gloomy Manor is quite one of the better mansions in this game. I mean, out of the 5 mansions, I'd put it in 4th place, but what can you do? Anyways, now it's time to move on to the next mansion of the game, the Haunted Towers. The next mansion of the game is the Haunted Towers, and it also has my personal favorite art direction of all the game's mansions. Instead of going for some sort of generic haunted house type setting, instead it has much more of a jungle-esque vibe to it. Practically all of the rooms have some sort of plant life occupying them, and along with that, the music has much more of a foresty, natural vibe to it as well. The structure itself is also quite different from the Gloomy Manor that came before it. Instead of just being one continuous structure, it's instead split off into 2 separate towers built around a giant tree. There are multiple points where the 2 towers are connected to each other, however they basically function as 2 different parts of the level split apart. And plus, the atmosphere in this mansion is great as well, with the music combined with the old and overgrown look to the place, giving off the feeling that this place is genuinely ancient. I also feel that the Haunted Towers are quite a notable step up in level design and mission quality compared to the Gloomy Manor. That's not to say the Gloomy Manor was bad by any means, but I do think this mansion is considerably better. So let's start off with the first mission of this mansion, B-1. Kicking off the Haunted Towers, we have B-1, Job for a Plumber. The mission starts off with Egad yapping to us a bit about how he's detected the next Dark Moon piece here in the Haunted Towers, and plus about how the water system is broken. So naturally, it's up to us to fix the water system once we're sent there. And after a bit more of Egad sharing his annoying voice with us, we finally get to go to the Haunted Towers and get our proper introduction to the place. The differences in atmosphere between the Haunted Towers and the Gloomy Manor before it already start to show themselves with this introduction. The first thing you'll have to do is go into the hydro generator located in the right tower. Once you go in there, you'll find a slammer messing with the place who will get angry at you before flying away. Egad then yaps to you a bit some more and you have to go into the left tower, but if you stick around in here before going to the left tower, and you use your dark light device in one specific part of the place, you'll be able to unlock this mission's boo pretty much straight away. This means that you don't have to spend a super long amount of time looking for the boo and you can get it out of the way pretty much straight away, which I kind of appreciate. Then once you've gotten inside of the lobby of the left tower, you'll have to use the dark light device to reveal the door to the greenhouse. The greenhouse itself isn't really too bad, there's just a few greenies with some shovels that show up, which aren't too hard to deal with, but it's still kinda nice. Once you've dealt with the greenhouse, you then pop out back at the other end of the lobby, having crossed the gap. Then you'll have to go upstairs a little bit and then enter into the plant nursery where you have your first encounter with the fly traps. The fly traps are pretty much, as their name implies, gigantic man-eating fly traps that'll try to swallow you if they see you. You can stun them with your strobe bulb, however it only lasts for a very brief amount of time, and along with that, to defeat them for good, you'll have to grab a spiky fruit and then throw it at them. I will say that these enemies do look kinda goofy, but they can be genuinely nerve-wracking to try and move around. After you exit the plant nursery, then you'll have to go to the Sky Bridge, which is basically a bridge that connects the two towers together. However, there's also a swarm of crows nearby, and they'll also fly through the gaps of the bridge. Pretty much you'll have to wait for whenever it's clear to cross, and then run as fast as you can to the other side. It's not much, but I do kinda like this little segment. I think it's pretty good. Then you'll enter into the laboratory where you'll find a slammer chasing a golden mouse. But it's not over once you've caught the slammer because a few greenies will show up, as always. But once you've taken care of the greenies, you're still not done with this room though, because 2 more slammers show up out of nowhere. It's a nice little subversion of expectations, and I can definitely see why this would catch a lot of people off guard. Then after that, we get introduced to a brand new mechanic, these weird balloon plant things. Whenever you suck them up with the poltergust, they get stuck to the tip of it, and when you blow outwards, it inflates the balloon things and causes you to rise up. I personally tend to enjoy this mechanic a decent bit, and I think it was utilized pretty well here. It shows how you can ascend and descend with the balloon thing, and along with that, it also shows that if it comes into contact with thorns, it'll pop, forcing you to be a bit careful. If you explore enough with the balloon plant thing as well, you'll be rewarded with a gem, which I quite like. After gaining enough height and exiting that room though, you finally manage to access the water supply at the top of the right tower. At first, it doesn't seem like this segment is all that special. First, you defeat a greenie, then you solve a simple little pressure plate plus strobe bulb puzzle, and then a cutscene plays and EGAD calls you, making it seem like the mission's over and the water supply in the haunted towers has been restored. But then, just when you think the mission's done, this ends up happening.
Ciao. I do it. Ha ha! Oh yeah! Ah, huh? Wow! Huh? Oh. Oh. Huh? Oh. Oh no no. Oh. Yeah.
Yeah, turns out this really fat ghost you see right in front of you was clogging up the water supply, and that's why it wasn't flowing. And now, of course, we've gotta catch said ghost. This new type of ghost that gets introduced here is called the Gobber, and it works fairly differently from the other ghosts. The Gobbers mostly stay in one place and don't really move around when you start suctioning them. What they instead do is spit out some sort of goo at you, and when you get close enough to them, they belly thrust at you. I'm gonna be completely honest with y'all here, I suck at fighting these ghosts, but I do think they make for a pretty good challenge, and I like them a fair bit. They also just look really funny to me, I'm sorry, I just can't take them seriously. But after finally catching the ghost equivalent of mukbang YouTubers, the mission finally comes to an end. Overall, this mission was a bit on the linear side of things, but I'm okay with that. The actual level design shown off here was really solid in my opinion, and was a major step up from the Gloomy Manor. It also showcased how to navigate between the towers, which I thought was really well done, and I like the focus on verticality. And the new ghost variety being introduced as a mini-boss at the end of the mission was actually really good. Overall, I pretty much like everything about this mission. There wasn't much that made it worthy of being one of the best in the game or anything, but I think it was excellent and was a great introduction to the mansion. So overall, I'm putting it in A tier. I think it deserves A tier. Now that we've managed to fix the water supply, it's time to move on to mission B-2, the Pinwheel Gate. Your initial objective for the mission is fairly simple. Go through the Pinwheel Gate in the courtyard and enter into the giant hollow tree that overlooks the towers. However, things do not go to plan as a bunch of hiders show up and steal 5 of the pinwheel veins to the gate. Once this happens, all of them flee into the right tower and you have to chase after them and retrieve the veins. This is kind of similar to how the Slammers stole all of the gears back in Mission A-2, however here it's hiders instead and you're exploring a different layout. There isn't really a set order you have to catch the hiders in, so for the sake of this video, I'm just going to be covering each of them in the order that I caught them in. The first one lies in the gardener's dwelling, and once you find it, it retreats under the floor, which leaves you with the puzzle of how exactly you're going to get underground to catch it. At first, there's no real hint as to how you're supposed to get underground, but if you turn the fan, you'll cause the bed in the room to go behind a wall. Once the bed's moved out of the way, it reveals an elevator that starts to go down when you stand on it. Granted, you do have to be holding a bucket full of water, but still. While this puzzle is a little bit on the cryptic side, I do really like how it rewards the player for actually exploring and investigating their environment. Once you're underground, you're able to catch a few greenies that have showed up with 6 sunglasses, and there's also going to be a fly trap that you're not actually able to kill. And then after searching, you'll be able to find the hider in this room and then catch it. However, if you go further back and into the sewer and pull on a dangling plant, you'll actually reveal this mission's boo, making it one of the few times the Darklight device isn't actually needed. This is also one of the more fun boos to defeat because, well, look at this.
Oh. Oh yeah.
The next hider you have to catch is probably the easiest of all of them to actually catch. It's hiding over in the tool shed, and in order to get to it, you just have to defeat a slammer and a few greenies beforehand. Then once you've taken care of them, you can just investigate the correct spot to bring out the hider and then catch him. The next one is located over in the garden just outside of the tool shed. At first, when you go into the garden, the hider gets spooked and then runs away. However, it's not hiding anywhere that you can see, so what you have to do is activate the lawnmower sitting there by pulling on its chain, and then move out of its way as it moves forward and then cuts down some hedges, allowing you to access the other part of the garden. Then, once you've accessed that part of the garden, 1 gobber and 2 greenies will show up. Normally, dealing with greenies isn't really all that tricky, but it can actually be a little challenging when combined with a gobber you've also got to keep in mind. Maybe I just suck at the game though, I don't know. But once you've taken care of all 3 of them, you can then find the hider and then catch it. After that, then you've got to go up the tool shed stairs and into the botany lab. Here, there's a little bit of a puzzle where you have to figure out how to get this vine to grow up into the next floor. There are water pipes in the room, however, there's a missing pipe part leading over to the vine. What you have to do is use your Darklight device in the empty spot, which then reveals the missing part, and then you can turn on the water. This puzzle isn't super hard or anything like that, but I do still like it because it tests your ability to use the Darklight device pretty good. Climbing up the massive vine like you're in Jack and the Beanstalk will take you into the seedling laboratory, where you have to defeat 2 greenies before being able to look for the hider. This may not seem hugely different from the other 2 hiders before it, however, I actually like this one a little bit more. That's most likely because of the little puzzle of trying to figure out how to get the vine to grow. There's also a little minigame in this room that's easy to miss. What you have to do is use this contraption to try and shoot a mouse that keeps moving along the room. If you're able to shoot the mouse successfully, you'll get rewarded with a gem. Going out the door takes you to the upper level of the tool shed stairs and takes you right along the path to the final hider you'll need to find for this mission. Once you reach the top of the stairs and go in the door, you'll enter into the conservatory where you see a slammer playing the organ. And if you look closely, you'll see that the hider keeps popping out of the pipes of the organ. First, you'll have to defeat the slammer as well as his buddies that show up to try and back him up. Once you've taken care of them, then you have to play the organ yourself and then time your strobulb flash just right to be able to catch the hider. And with that, we've managed to collect all 5 of the pinwheel veins that were stolen and were taken back to Egad's lab. This mission here was a great follow-up to the first mission for the Haunted Towers in my opinion. I like how instead of having us traverse between each tower and only experiencing a limited section of each one, it's instead set entirely in one of the towers where we thoroughly explore the remainder of it that we haven't yet. And while 2 of the hiders were kind of basic to be able to find, the other ones were actually kind of interesting when it came to trying to locate them, which I really do like. The puzzle solving here was also really well done, and overall, I think this mission also deserves to be put in A tier. Now for the next mission, B-3 Graveyard Shift. This mission is a bit different than the 2 others before it, and you can see that straight away because you're immediately dropped in face to face with a fly trap. The fly trap is also blocking the gate you have to use to get into the mansion, so you have to kill it. In order to kill it, you have to solve a puzzle where you release a plant from a pipe, then you grab a bucket, fill the bucket with water, use it to water one of the different plants growing, grab the spiky fruit, and then shoot it at the fly trap. This isn't a complex or difficult puzzle by any means, however, since this is how the mission starts off, I do kind of like that it keeps you on your toes. This is also the only mission in the entire game where you actually spawn in face to face with an enemy, which makes this stand out a lot. Upon entering the courtyard, you'll then get to watch a pretty silly cutscene where 2 ghosts are messing with the 1 pinwheel vein that's left. Then the greenie ends up seeing Luigi and then just scurries off while the slammer still struggles to try and pull the vein off. Seriously, the look on the greenie's face as it tries to shuffle away is just really funny to me. Anyway, after that cutscene's over, you then have to defeat the slammer and his 2 buddies, and side note, I feel like every single time in this game where there's 1 ghost shown in a cutscene, as soon as you actually start fighting them, 2 more show up out of nowhere. I mean, I'm not really complaining about it or anything. I mean, I think it makes it more fun and engaging, but it's kind of a recurring theme in this game, as you'll see. After you've captured the slammers, though, the greenie shows back up with nothing to arm itself with and no backup, so yeah, it's pretty easy. There's a little secret, though, that's really easy to miss. If you go into the hydro generator of the right tower, you'll find a gold greenie waiting for you inside. It's nothing crazy or anything like that, but I think it's a nice little secret for rewarding exploration. Back to our main objective of the mission, though. Since we collected all of the pinwheel veins in the previous mission, we can now finally repair the gate and enter into the hollow tree. Inside, pretty much, is a bunch of different stairs that you have to go up, and you have to pick the correct staircase out of the 2 on each level. If you pick the wrong one, you'll have to catch a ghost, but it's not really all that bad. Once you get to the top, though, there's 1 big door you can go in. Well, it seems like you can go in it until it closes right in front of you and it's got a big keyhole in it, so yeah. After that, your objective ends up getting changed. Now you have to get to the bottom of the hollow tree and into the graveyard. According to Egad, there should be a key inside the crypt near the graveyard, however, since this is the 3rd mission of the mansion, of course it's not over yet. But we'll get back to that. For now, you just have to descend down back to the bottom of the tree, grab a spider web ball, light it on fire, and then carry it above the water, and then light this cobweb on fire so you can then enter into the tree root. After pulling a vine, you'll end up finding a chute inside the tree root. Going up the chute spits you out of this crow statue's head and into the graveyard. I've gotta say, this is one of the few locations in the game that actually kinda scares me. It's not because of the visuals or anything like that, it's the ambience. Like, it is some of the creepiest ambience in the entire game. There's another gold greenie you can find here in the graveyard by blowing out these candles, but even while you're catching it, there's no music, just the ambience, which is really, really disturbing. And as you walk up to the crypt, each set of torches extinguishes one by one. Once you actually go inside the crypt and break down the brick wall, you'll find that there isn't a key inside here, but a toad painting. Before you use your dark light device on it though, you might want to use it elsewhere in the room to find the boo. Once you use your dark light device on the painting, it turns out that this toad was turned into a painting by Booze. Egad also recognizes that this is his assistant that he sent to keep watch over the haunted towers. So now you've got to get him back down underground by the sewer area in order to get him to the pixelator screen and sent back to the lab, making this the first of the game's Toad rescue missions. As you exit the crypt though, something a little unexpected happens. Now we've entered a mini-boss fight against the three sisters, Lucinda, Belinda, and Herlinda. This is the only mini-boss in the entire game that isn't a poltergeist variant and isn't some kind of ghost that we see again as a regular enemy later on, making them much more akin to the lesser portrait ghosts from the original Luigi's Mansion. It's also strongly implied that these three sisters were the original owners of the haunted towers before they became all ruined. Honestly, I wish we had more mini-bosses like this in the game, or even bosses like this. Maybe being able to fight against the former owners of the old Clockworks, the secret mine, or the treacherous mansion, but unfortunately this is the only mini-boss of its kind in the game. And while I may have praised the originality of this fight's presentation, I unfortunately can't really praise the gameplay of this fight because this might just be the easiest mini-boss in the game. The three sisters circle around Luigi with their mirrors held up that shield them from the strobe bulb and will occasionally let them down. You have to wait for one of the sisters to let their mirrors down and then stun them and suck them up. The other two sisters will try to attack you in the meantime, but to be completely honest, their attacks are kinda pathetic. They pretty much attack and act like glorified greenies, just with different designs. The fight's just boring and it isn't challenging in the least, and I felt nothing after beating them. After we manage to beat the three sisters, Egad calls us and then talks about how they're apparently ghost celebrities and stuff, but I honestly couldn't really care after that mediocre fight. Now we have to walk over to this coffin while carrying Toad to be dropped down into the sewer. Then we have to carry him over the water and into the gardener's lab, and then send him through the pixelator screen, and then the mission's done. This mission is definitely a bit on the shorter side, and I'd say it's a mission of two halves. The first half of the mission I'd say was actually pretty solid and got me looking forward to the second half, but then the second half of the mission with the mini-boss came and it was rather disappointing. It's not like it's the worst thing in the world, but it definitely could have been a lot better and wasn't all that great. So this mission starts off really good, but then gets kind of meh, so I'd say it's got an equal amount of good and an equal amount of bad. So overall, the entire mission I'd say gets a middle-of-the-road C tier. Luckily though, after that slight dip in mission quality, the Haunted Towers picks right back up with mission B-4 Pool Party. This is the first mission of the game to start off with the tridimensional camera image, which, although a pretty minor thing in the actual game, is still a pretty cute way of giving us an idea of what the mission's about before we start it. We also happen to see a new kind of ghost being handed the key to the door in the tree, as well as two boos carrying a painting inside of a sack, and side note, Egad treats it like, wow, I wonder who could be in this painting, but I mean, come on, look at the shoes, it's obvious who it is, especially given the plot of the previous game. Anyway, so after that, you're dropped into the mission with one simple goal: reach the rooftop pool. You have to run past two fly traps out in the courtyard, and then go into the plant nursery at the left tower. Once you enter the plant nursery, you'll find a new plant growing in there that wasn't there before. What you then have to do is find a bucket in the room, then fill the bucket with water, and then water the plant, which causes it to turn into a giant beanstalk, which then breaks through the ceiling. Once you then climb the beanstalk that's been created, it leads you up into the rumpus room, and okay, I've got to admit, this room is actually terrifying to me. I absolutely hate everything to do with things like dolls and jack-in-the-boxes, and this room plays right off those fears I have. It also doesn't help that the giant doll in the center of the room actually turns to follow you when you move around the room. You can even cause her head to pop off, which rewards you with a gem, which is just really unsettling. What you have to do is look through one of the windows in the dollhouse, which causes you to look back at yourself. Don't ask me how this makes sense. You'll also see one of the jack-in-the-boxes wiggling a little bit, which is where the ghosts are located at. Once you stop looking, you then have to open that jack-in-the-box and then catch the greenies, which isn't too bad. Once you've taken care of that business, you can step outside the room and enter into the family room, which is basically like a dilapidated little apartment inside the tower. And if you use your dark light device to reveal a missing painting, you'll be able to find this mission's boo. Then after that, you'll have to head into the solarium, where you'll get to watch an admittedly really silly cutscene of some hiders roughhousing in the bedroom. When you're done with that, then you'll have to actually go inside the bedroom and catch all three of the hiders. Except after you've caught the first one, the other two will hide in the beds, and then the beds swap around. That's right, it's like a game of whack-a-mole almost, where you have to guess the correct bed. It's pretty easy, but I like that they included this, and it made it a bit more of an interesting encounter than your usual hider encounter. Then you'll go over into the West Hall, then across the crow's nest, and into the conservatory of the other tower. Then you'll have to fly up above the conservatory and then grab the key from outside before running back and entering the West bathroom. Inside the West bathroom, there's just a slammer, two greenies, but also a new variety of ghosts known as the Creeper. The Creepers are probably the most unique ghost type in the entire game. Instead of pursuing you in some sort of unique way, what they instead do is form puddles on the ground, and then when you step on the puddle, it'll engulf you and then tickle you, I think, before then splitting up into a bunch of smaller ghosts. You can either make the larger one pop up using the poltergust / the dark light device, or you could intentionally split the ghost up and vacuum up the smaller little bits. They can be pretty dangerous because sometimes it's nearly impossible to see where they're at. This incentivizes the player to be very careful and observant of their surroundings. But anyways, now you'll finally be able to access the rooftop pool and grab the key. Or so it would seem at first, because as soon as you grab the key, this happens. And now we have ourselves a new variety of ghost to worry about, the Sneaker. And I think it goes without saying, this is easily my favorite ghost introduction of the game. It helps perfectly establish a good atmosphere as well as the personality of a Sneaker. Along with that, it's the one ghost introduction in the game that actually feels kind of creepy. I don't know what it is, but something about the first part of this cutscene actually creeps me out a little bit. The sneakers will spend most of their time invisible and will stalk after Luigi and wait to scare him. Whenever Luigi gets scared by the sneakers, it causes him to be stunned for a brief moment as well as to lose any ghosts he's currently suctioning. However, you're able to see the trails they leave behind in things such as water, as well as use the dark light device to see where they're at. The sneakers can be pretty tricky to handle in groups, however, once you beat the 3 sneakers, you're able to get the key. Again, or so it would seem. This time, a much less creepy, much more goofy cutscene plays. It also is another ghost introduction cutscene. This time it's a single ghost that pops up multiple times throughout the game to cause us trouble. Yeah, you know the one, it's the Polterpup.
Yeah. Ho ho! Huh? No, bad dog.
Yeah, the Polterpup ends up stealing the key from us because of course he does, and then Egad takes us back to his lab, ending the mission. Overall, this mission had a surprisingly rich amount of content for how short it is. It's also the first mission of the Haunted Towers that I can confidently say has much more new stuff in it than repeated stuff, especially with the 2 new ghost varieties. Pretty much the entire mission consists of nothing but new areas of the Haunted Towers, and the few places that are repeated at least have new content inside of them. It also introduced 2 new ghost varieties that show up for the rest of the game in ways that are very simple yet effective. Overall, it's one of my favorite missions in the game, and I think it's the first S-tier mission of the video. They really nailed it with this one. And now for the penultimate mission of the Haunted Towers, where we hunt after the Polterpup that stole the key, mission B-5 Doggone Key. You first find the Polterpup out in the courtyard where he runs into the right tower with the key. At first, it seems pretty unclear as to how you're meant to chase after him, however, if you use the dark light device, you'll be able to actually see his footprints, as well as marks where he phased through any walls. By following these with the dark light device, you'll eventually be able to find him over in the tool shed. However, before you're able to capture him, he runs away. He then runs over into the garden, and once you enter the garden, he runs away again. But before you're able to run back after him inside the tower, 3 sneakers show up to block your path, so yeah. But once you actually go back inside the tool shed, you'll find that everything is missing. And along with that, all of the music completely cuts out as well. Pretty much you have to use the dark light device to reveal all of the missing stuff in order to find the boo in here, and this is basically where the mission's boo is at. While it might not be super complicated trying to find the boo, this is easily my favorite boo of the game. And the reason why comes down purely to just how memorable it is. Like, man. Walking back into the tool shed only for everything to suddenly be gone and then the boo to show up is quite memorable in my opinion. After that, you then chase the Polterpup all the way up to the conservatory where he's hiding inside the organ. You also have another creeper as company, so yeah. But after you've caught the creeper, you still have to deal with 2 greenies and a gobber that show up, which can be pretty challenging for me because, again, I suck at fighting gobbers, especially when they're joined by other ghosts. Once again, though, it is still pretty fun even if challenging, so I don't mind. Then you have another Polterpup run-in over at the west bathroom where he runs away over to the west bedroom, which isn't very far away. However, when you step out into the West Hall, you have to deal with 3 tiny creepers, although this is pretty easy because, well, they're the tiny creepers. When you step into the West Bedroom, you first have to catch 1 creeper that drops from the ceiling, and then after that you have to pull the blanket off of the correct bed to catch the polterpup. After this, you finally retrieve the key, even though it's all chewed up and gross now. Then Egad takes you back to his lab and ends the mission. But once you're back at his lab, the polterpup ends up escaping from the poltergust, so there's that. Overall, I didn't really have much to say about this mission. It doesn't really have that much new content, and it's mostly just repeated stuff. Although I will say the actual ghost encounters in this mission were pretty solid in my opinion. And it still has decent enough replay value even though it's lacking in originality. Overall, I'd say this mission gets a B tier. But now it's time for the final mission of the Haunted Towers, it's boss mission B-Boss Tree Topping. This time though, unlike in the Gloomy Manor, you don't just get to fight the boss, i.e. the harsh possessor, straight away. Instead, you have to do a little segment with a challenge before fighting him. And I'm gonna have to be completely honest with you all, I do not like this mission at all. I'm not complaining that there's a challenge before the boss, in fact, I actually appreciate when games do this, and I'm not complaining because the challenge is hard, in fact, I appreciate difficulty. However, the thing is, the challenge here is not cryptic nor hard, it's just stupid. Basically, you see a bunch of staircases right in front of you that leads to the top of the tree. On each row of staircases, you've got to guess the correct one, and if you miss, you have to fight a ghost. This might not sound all that bad. In fact, a mission before this did something very similar and did it not very bad at all. However, here it is significantly worse because, well, instead of just going down 1 level of staircases, you slide back down all the way to the bottom when you guess wrong. And after you catch the ghost, which is usually pretty easy, you have to run all the way back up from the bottom. And trust me, this gets extremely tedious, extremely quickly. To be fair, for a brief moment at times, it will have the fires of the correct staircase go out, giving you a hint. However, this only lasts for so long, and after that, it's basically just blind guessing unless you've got good memory. You're more likely to spend time trying to guess the correct staircase here than you are actually fighting the harsh possessor. This just isn't fun at all. I'd normally try to think of ways to improve this, but honestly, the fact that this is even the challenge at all is what kills this for me. It's not fun in any way, even if it can be a bit easy with good enough luck. I seriously don't know what they were thinking when they designed this section. So anyways, once you finally get through that garbage fire, is the boss at the top of the tree actually any good? No. In fact, it might just be my least favorite boss in the entire game. The Harsh Possessor's concept is kinda funny as he possesses a literal staircase and tries to eat you, but on the other hand, it's just kind of lame. I mean, it just feels very out of nowhere, and along with that, I feel like some sort of flytrap monster being possessed would have been a lot more thematically fitting. As for the gameplay of the fights, it's extremely easy, even easier than the mini-boss of the Haunted Towers. Basically, it chomps at you occasionally, shoots some fire sometimes, all of its attacks are very, very slow and telegraphed, you just gotta run around it in circles, then wait for it to do a big leap, and when it does that, pull on the string and bring out the possessor. Repeat this a few times, and the boss is dead. Yeah, there's basically no challenge to be found here. I get it, it's the second boss of the game, it doesn't have to be all that hard. But that doesn't mean the fight has to be mindless. But on the off chance that you do actually die here, well, you have to redo the staircase section all over again. Yeah, I haven't really said much about this mission because it's not giving me much to say. I just don't like this mission at all. It's genuinely atrocious, as it has the most stupid pre-boss challenge of the entire game. It's an agonizingly tedious endeavor to try and even get up to the boss, and once you actually reach it, the boss isn't even good. So yeah, after you capture the Possessor, you get the second Dark Moon piece, and the mission's over. Overall, I have nothing positive to say. I hate this mission. The boss at the end already sucks and would have made this mission place lowly, but the section right before it absolutely tanks this. I'm sorry to say, but I can't put this mission any higher than F tier. Man, this mission sucks. Anyways, now it's time for me to give my closing thoughts on the Haunted Towers. Overall, despite the Haunted Towers falling kinda flat in the mini-boss and boss department, the actual level design of the place as well as the atmosphere was honestly excellent. I feel like this mansion is a gigantic improvement over the Gloomy Manor and feels much more distinct and unique. I really love this mansion, even if it ended on a bit of a sour note. So anyways, it's time to move on to the third mansion of the game, the old Clockworks. The old Clockworks is the third mansion of the game and has one of the more unique settings across the Luigi's Mansion trilogy. Even though it's technically classified as a mansion in the game, it doesn't really feel like one at all. Instead of being some sort of place of residence now long abandoned, instead this is an old clock factory built over some ruins in the desert. I will admit, out of the game's 5 mansions, this is definitely my least favorite of them, however, I won't deny that the setting here is really solid. It's also by no means a bad mansion per se, I just happen to enjoy the other ones more, but this one is still pretty decent. The atmosphere here is at least really spot on despite an overall more linear map design. Some of the missions in the old Clockworks are really good, some of them not so much, and it's overall a mixed bag, however, I'll try to be as positive as I can. So anyways, let's start off with the first mission of the old Clockworks, C-1. The mission starts off in Egad's lab, where he tells us that he's found the next Dark Moon piece over in the old Clockworks, specifically at the top of the clock tower. So our initial goal for the mission is to reach the top of the clock tower and retrieve the Dark Moon piece. This sounds like it's going to be pretty simple, but of course it doesn't end up being that way, but we'll get there. We also get an image of the clock tower gate, which, fittingly enough, resembles a clock. After a bit more of Egad being, well, Egad, we finally get sent over to the old Clockworks and get our introduction to the place. This is quite the atmospheric introduction to the place, with the ambience in the background, the music cue when the Clockworks is actually shown, as well as just the overall vibe of the outside of the old Clockworks. It makes for a very memorable introduction that feels very atmospheric. You also get a telescope positioned right where you spawn into the mission, where you can actually see the Possessor ghost on top of the old Clockworks' clock tower. It's a small little detail they put in, but I'm happy they put it in. I'm all for small details like that. First, we have to actually get inside of the old Clockworks through the gate. This involves a little puzzle where we have to get the clock face to show the correct time, however, it's not too tricky, because next to the gate is a clock with the correct time showing. So pretty much get the gate to show the same time as the clock next to it and you're all good. Upon actually entering into the first room of the old Clockworks, the warehouse, there's a greenie that shows up, but it immediately runs away, so I'm not quite sure what the point is. The music also changes to the old Clockworks theme, and, well... This is without question my favorite musical track in the entire game. It perfectly suits the atmosphere the old Clockworks tries to build up, and it's just a really good song. The choice of instruments here also really helps sell the idea that this is some sort of really old-timey abandoned factory. I'm trying not to go on for too long about it because, well, I don't want to annoy you guys with the segment about the first mission of the old Clockworks being almost entirely dedicated to the music, but it's really good in my opinion. In order to access the next room, the workshop, you have to use the machine at the left of the warehouse on one of the golden barrel things in the room. Once you use it on the golden barrel, it pops out the key. But if you do this with another barrel in the room in particular, it'll unlock the mission's boo. You can also go into the roundhouse, however you can't cross the gap to get to the other side of the roundhouse, and the stairs leading down underground are blocked off. Once you go inside the workshop, there's a giant bomb with 2 greenies. What you gotta do is just flash the bomb with your strobe bulb to make it go off and stun the greenies so you can suck them up. After this, you're able to enter the clock tower gate, only surprise surprise, you can't actually go through it. The reason why? Both of the clock hands as well as the clock rotor that can change the time on them are missing. So now your goal is changed from having to enter into the old Clockworks' tower into trying to find all of the parts so you can put the gate back together. However, before you can do that, you have one task. Find a compass. This is because it'll help you on your way. Then a few greenies show up, except this time they burrow into the sand and create twisters above them. You pretty much have to avoid the twisters until the greenies surface back up feeling dizzy. After this, you're able to flash them and capture them. Even though this is barely ever seen again in the game, I still think this is a pretty cute variation of the greenie. Then in the cargo room, you'll have to pull the cloth off of one of the windows and then flash the bomb behind it. Doing so will cause the gap in the middle of the room to flood with sand, allowing you to cross. This is a pretty nice idea for a puzzle, but unfortunately it ends up being extremely easy in practice. However, you're also able to see a completely blocked off section of the old Clockworks you can't access yet. If you look through the peephole, you'll be able to see a toad getting chased by boos before falling off the edge. We'll come back to him later. Then 2 greenies followed by a slammer show up, and by this point in the game, they're pretty easy to deal with, so I have basically nothing to say. Then you go to the upper level of the cargo room and then cross a bridge over the upper part of the clock tower gate. Then you're finally able to enter into the drafting office where the compass is. At first there's just a single lone greenie in there, but then after you capture him, 3 sneakers show up. If even one of them is not currently being vacuumed, he'll be able to scare you out of the vacuuming state, so the optimal strategy here is to try and round up all 3 at once and then capture all of them. After this admittedly kind of fun challenge though, you end up finishing the mission and grabbing the compass. Overall, this mission was a decent introduction to the old Clockworks, but at the same time it felt kind of linear and uninteresting. The mission's not bad by any means, but I was definitely expecting a little bit more after finishing the Haunted Towers. It also feels like it didn't introduce a huge amount of new content, however the content here wasn't bad. Overall, I'd say this mission gets a C tier. It's pretty alright, but not really all that memorable. Picking up from there is Mission C-2 Underground Expedition. We start off the mission again on the outside of the old Clockworks, except this time we don't go inside and we have to use the compass at a specific point on the ground. Thankfully, it isn't too hard to figure out where we're supposed to use the compass because there's an X on the map to indicate where we're supposed to use it. Once we get there and place down the compass, it reveals a trapdoor that we then fall into. When we've fully fallen down the trapdoor, we emerge in the storm shelter underground. Inside the storm shelter, there's not really all that much, pretty much just a greenie with a rock that tries to get you. But after you beat the greenie, you have to put the rock on the platform next to where you fell in. Doing this raises the gate on the door and you're able to enter through it. This then leads you to a previously inaccessible part of the old Clockworks, the underground section. These are pretty much the ruins the old Clockworks were built on. It also changes up the music as well to reflect this. The music goes from indicating an old-timey type of building to some sort of ancient Egyptian type place. It feels like a track that wouldn't be out of place in Indiana Jones. The first part of this underground section is the canyon hall, with not much really in it and seemingly having a dead end. That is, at least until you realize that one of the walls here is actually a fake wall. Going through this fake wall then takes you over into the canyon narrows nearby. From there you have to cross to one side of the canyon narrow and then use a zip line to get back to the other side and cross by the blockage. Once you're back inside the canyon hall on the other side of the rubble blocking you off, a sneaker will end up showing up and trying to get you, but it's not that hard to deal with since it's just one. There's also a little passage that leads to the stairs by the roundhouse where you can now destroy the rubble blocking them off. I don't know why you're able to do this because you never go back to this place at all, but it's still pretty cool, I guess. Going through the door at the end of the canyon hall takes you into the roundhouse pit. And if you go into the coffin inside this room, you'll end up getting a small little cutscene with a boo as well as a hider. This cutscene also happens to show you where the hider is located at, allowing you to deal with him. Breaking through the wall, though, reveals a new door that was not visible before. Behind the door is the pit slide, which is basically a one-way slide down a slope deeper into the ruins. I know it's nothing much, but I always have a soft spot for slides, so yeah. Beyond this is the quarry. Here you have to pull a minecart over to where sand is falling down in order to cover the hole. After doing that, the quarry will begin to fill with sand slowly rising up to the door. While this is happening though, a bunch of greenies will show up, both without weapons but also with weapons. And after the greenies, there comes a few sneakers as well. The thing that makes this challenging is just the amount of ghosts that'll show up at one time. It's not super challenging or anything, but it can be a little stressful at times. However, I mean that in a good way. There's also a visibly missing bridge in this room, and if you use your Darklight device where the bridge should be, that's when you'll unlock the mission's boo. After the quarry, though, you enter into the antechamber. It's a fairly simple little room. Basically what you have to do is just grab a spiderweb ball from over in the hallway, light it on fire with one of the torches, and then walk to the end. It's not really all that challenging, there's no enemies in here, but what makes it stand out is just the atmosphere. It's almost entirely pitch black here. The only light sources are the fire and your flashlight, nothing else. There's also no music here, just quiet, creepy ambience. There's no silly shenanigans from the ghosts, there's no anything in here. It's genuinely really creepy. Dark Moon may not have all that many moments that are genuinely unnerving, but this is definitely up there among the most unnerving places in the entire trilogy, in my opinion. Past the antechamber is the tomb, the final room of the ruins. There's only one thing in the center of the room, a coffin, and we have nothing else to do but to open it. Upon opening it, one of the clock hands for the clock tower gate floats out, but then an ancient poltergeist rises up from the coffin and flies away. Then a bunch of mummies show up. The mummies work differently from most enemies in this game. Flashing them doesn't really stun them. Instead, it causes them to shield their faces and charge forward. What you have to do is flash them and cause them to run into a wall before they end up falling over. Once they've fallen over, you have to grab onto their wraps and then pull them. Once this happens, all the wrappings come undone and it's revealed that they're just greenies underneath. And I've got to admit, it's really funny. After that, though, the mission's basically over. There's nothing else, and you just get taken back to the lab. Overall, I'd say this mission was a massive step up from C-1. The level design was really interesting here. There was an entirely new section of the Clockworks that hasn't been visited before this mission and won't be visited again, basically being exclusive. A whole different atmosphere than the other missions in the old Clockworks. And some really decent exploration as well. The only thing that I kind of have to complain about with this mission is just that it's pretty short. I just wish we got to explore more of the ruins underneath the old Clockworks. That would have been amazing. But even still, it's not a huge deal, and overall, I'd say this mission deserves A tier. And then after that mission is mission C-3 Roundhouse Brawl. In this mission, you've managed to pinpoint the location of the ancient poltergeist, the roundhouse. Except you're not able to access the other side of the roundhouse from the ground. So what you have to do is go into the warehouse and take the elevator up. Previously there was a bunch of rubble blocking the door in front of the elevator. However, now there's a bomb there, and it's never explained why. Now you're able to destroy the rubble and get through the door. On the other side of the door is the Clockmaker's chambers. Here you can see a greenie sleeping with a gem. It's entirely optional to do this, but what you're able to do is pull the rug out from on the floor and then pull the rotor beneath it until the clock displays 9 AM. Once you get the clock to display 9 o'clock, an alarm blares which wakes up the greenie, allowing you to capture it and get the gem. From here you'll be able to enter into the upper level of the roundhouse where you'll have to cross some beams to get to the other side. And also, the ancient poltergeist shows himself too, and he does not shut up the entire time you're in the roundhouse. Having to listen to the same annoying, loud, demonic doodlebob sounds over and over again gets really agitating. Once you get to the other side of the upper roundhouse, you can enter into the transportation hall, which has one unique feature. Basically, the floor for most of the hallway acts like a conveyor belt whenever you walk on it, moving away from the end of the hall whenever you walk on it. Pretty much, this prevents you from walking forward, at all. On paper, it could have been done well, but in practice, it just makes navigating the hallway more unnecessarily annoying. First, you go into the finishing room, which has some greenies that you take out, so that's cool, I guess. Then you have to go into the container yard, where there's a slammer waiting for you. We've fought these guys before. Except this time there's a bit of a weight puzzle here. Basically, if you add 3 bombs to the scale, it allows the bridge to fall down, but the other bridge to lift all the way up. What you have to do is first have the 3 bombs on the scale, so that way you're able to cross, but then when it comes time to cross the second bridge, flash your light on all 3 of the bombs, causing the other bridge to fall down. It's pretty simple, but a decent puzzle in my opinion. There hasn't been any other puzzle like this with the bombs. I kind of like that. Then next stop is the kiln room. In here, you just have to use the dark light device in order to reveal the second handle, and then spin both of them to stop the steam. Then vacuum up all the steam and catch some of the greenies. Once you've caught the greenies though, the boo of the mission shows up with no puzzle involved. For me, this just screams they ran out of ideas as to how to hide the boo in this mission, so they just made it so that it'll always show up no matter what. I will say though, the boo's name is incredibly funny. Most other boos have pretty standard puns on the word boo as their names, but this one is literally named, I kid you not, Boodonkulous. It's just so random, and honestly I kinda like that. Finally, you manage to make it to the end of the transportation hall, where you use the dark light device on a painting to get the key to the lower level of the roundhouse. Then you enter into the lower level of the roundhouse and fight the ancient poltergeist. The ancient poltergeist plays very similarly to the original poltergeist from the Gloomy Manor, except significantly less interesting. He throws bricks at you this time, and the arena is not really all that fitting, and occasionally he creates a twister in the middle of the room and throws bombs out. Bombs which are very easy to avoid, and instead of having two other poltergeists descend down upon you, he just has some other sneakers show up. This fight is meant to be different from the original poltergeist, but it feels very similar, but not in a good way. The fight is just painfully mediocre. And after you beat him, you get the minute hand for the clock tower gate, and then the mission's over. I didn't really have as much to say about this mission as the previous one because it didn't give me a lot to say. The only parts of the mission I kinda liked were very minor. Most of the mission just felt kind of tedious and boring. I'm not trying to be too pessimistic here, but I was pretty underwhelmed here. The difficulty doesn't even really feel there to an extent. So I think it deserves to be put in D tier. They could have really done better here. Hey, so it's me, Gussie here, popping in from on my porch once again. Just here to let you know that that's it for part 1. I don't know when part 2 of this whole, review thing is gonna come out. It might be a little bit, I don't know, but, yeah, either way, I hope you really enjoyed, my video. It's always fun for me to go on about one of my hyperfixations regardless of how relevant it actually is, but, yeah, I definitely had a lot of fun making this. Forgive the lighting. I'm using my phone's flashlight right now, but, yeah, and I can't actually see what I look like right now, but I will in editing. Hopefully I don't look too bad. Yeah, I'll, see you guys next time, and I hope you enjoyed.